London, 1851. Jane Holloway clutched the letter in her trembling hands, the black ink stark against the cream paper. She read the words again, though they had already burned themselves into her memory. Her father was dead, his debts overwhelming, and their modest home in Shropshire to be seized within the fortnight. Miss Holloway, Mrs. Peterson's sharp voice cut through Jane's grief. The silver needs polishing before the Duchess arrives for tea. Jane tucked the letter into her apron pocket and straightened her shoulders. At 20, with no formal education but a quick mind and nimble fingers, she had secured a position as a housemaid at Deverell House in London's fashionable Mayfair. The wages were meagre but steady. Now, they were all that stood between her and destitution. "Yes, Mrs. Peterson," Jane replied, following the housekeeper into the drawing-room. 3 months at Deverell House had taught Jane the invisible movement expected of servants. She polished each piece of silver in silence, listening as the Duchess of Harlington gossiped with Lady Deverell. "It's been over a year since poor Eliza Iverson's death, and the Duke remains in seclusion at Thornfield Hall," the Duchess said, lifting her teacup. "Such a tragedy for little Lord Alexander. A boy needs a mother. And the Duke needs a wife," Lady Deverell replied. "His estates are vast, his fortune secure. I've heard Lady Catherine has set her cap for him." "Lady Catherine would set her cap for Satan himself if he possessed a title," the Duchess laughed. "But rumour has it the Duke won't receive visitors. Even his own family is turned away. They say grief has made him half-mad." Jane moved to the next piece, a silver candelabra that reflected her plain face in its polished surface. She had no time for gossip about aristocrats and their troubles. Tonight she must write to her mother's cousin in Bath to beg for shelter. The letter from Cousin Agatha arrived 2 days later. There would be no refuge in Bath. The cramped quarters, the 5 children already sharing beds, the persistent cough that plagued Agatha's husband, all made Jane's arrival impossible. Jane walked through Hyde Park during her half-day off, the weak October sun failing to warm her skin. Bare trees stretched skeletal fingers toward the grey sky. A child's laugh pierced the sombre afternoon, drawing Jane's attention to a young boy rolling a hoop along the gravel path. His fine clothes marked him as a child of privilege, his golden curls bouncing with each step. Without warning, the hoop veered toward the ornamental pond. The boy followed, too intent on his game to notice the danger. Jane rushed forward as the child's foot slipped on the muddy bank. She caught his arm just as he began to topple, pulling him back from the water's edge with such force that they both tumbled onto the damp grass. "Alexander!" A man's voice, deep and commanding, called out. Jane scrambled to her feet, helping the boy up as a tall figure strode toward them. The gentleman's severe countenance was softened only by eyes that matched the boy's, a startling blue that reminded Jane of summer skies. "Papa, I nearly fell in," the boy exclaimed, seeming more excited than frightened by his close call. The gentleman's gaze shifted from his son to Jane, assessing her plain brown dress and simple bonnet. "You have my gratitude, Miss Holloway, sir." "Jane Holloway." She curtsied, acutely aware of the grass stains on her only good dress. "Miss Holloway," he acknowledged with a slight bow. "I am the Duke of Iverson. This is my son, Lord Alexander." Jane felt her cheeks flush. The very Duke the Duchess had gossiped about stood before her, not hidden away in grief but watching his son play in the park. "Your quick action prevented what could have been a serious accident," the Duke continued. "Allow me to compensate you for your kindness." "No compensation is necessary, Your Grace," Jane replied, embarrassed by the offer. "Any person would have done the same." "Not any person was present to do so," he countered, his expression grave. "Only you." Lord Alexander tugged at his father's sleeve. "She saved me, Papa." "Like an angel." The Duke's stern mouth softened slightly. "Indeed." He studied Jane more carefully. "You're in service." "Yes, Your Grace." "At Deverell House." "I see." He reached into his coat and withdrew a card. "Should you ever require assistance, Miss Holloway?" Jane accepted the card, unsure what to say. As she walked away, she felt the weight of the Duke's gaze following her, like a physical touch upon her shoulder. 3 weeks later, Jane found herself without a position. Lady Deverell, upon discovering Jane reading a book from the family library, had dismissed her without a character reference. Without references, no respectable household would employ her. Standing in the employment office, Jane clutched the Duke's card. She had resisted using it, but desperation had worn away her pride. The clerk's eyebrows rose when she mentioned the Duke of Iverson. His Grace specifically requested we send qualified candidates for the position of nursemaid to Lord Alexander, the clerk said. But you have no experience with children, Miss Holloway. I helped raise my younger siblings, Jane replied, omitting that both had died in infancy. And Lord Alexander and I are already acquainted. The clerk hesitated, then wrote an address on a slip of paper. The Duke's London residence. Present yourself tomorrow morning at 9. The Duke's townhouse in Grosvenor Square loomed before Jane the next morning, its white stone facade imposing in the weak winter sunlight. A stern-faced butler led her to a study where the Duke sat behind a massive desk. Miss Holloway. He didn't rise, merely gestured for her to sit. I received word from the employment office. You seek the position of nursemaid to my son. Yes, Your Grace. Jane sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Why were you dismissed from your previous position? His direct question caught her off guard. Jane considered lying, then decided truth was her only recourse. I was caught reading a book from Lady Deverell's library. I'd finished my duties and thought no one would mind, but Lady Deverell felt differently. Something flickered in the Duke's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or interest. You can read well, then? Yes, Your Grace. My father was a clergyman before his difficulties. He ensured I received an education. The Duke leaned forward. My son needs more than a nursemaid, Miss Holloway. His previous governess left to marry, and finding a suitable replacement has proven challenging. Alexander is spirited. Children often are, Your Grace. Indeed. He studied her for a long moment. Can you manage basic arithmetic? Geography? History? Yes, Your Grace. And I'm passable at drawing and have some knowledge of French. He nodded, decision made. You'll serve as Alexander's governess, then. The salary is £30 per annum, with room and board. You'll have Sundays to yourself unless Alexander requires special attention. Jane blinked, hardly believing her fortune. Thank you, Your Grace. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity. Don't thank me yet, Miss Holloway, the Duke replied, his expression unreadable. Alexander has driven away 3 governesses already. We shall see if you fare better. Lord Alexander proved to be as spirited as his father had warned, but Jane discovered that his mischief stemmed from boredom rather than malice. Within a month, she had established a routine that channeled his energy into learning. Miss Holloway, why must I practice penmanship when I could be riding? Alexander complained one March afternoon, the spring sunshine tempting him from the schoolroom window. Because a gentleman must write as well as he rides, Jane replied, placing another sheet before him. Finish this page, and we'll take our geography lesson outdoors. The Duke, passing by the open door, paused to observe. Jane felt his presence but continued the lesson without acknowledging him. Papa! Alexander exclaimed. Miss Holloway is teaching me about maps today. She says we'll go to the garden and make our own map of the grounds. The Duke entered the room, examining the boy's work. Your penmanship has improved considerably. Miss Holloway says I must be able to write letters that others can read without squinting, Alexander explained. A practical consideration, the Duke agreed, his gaze moving to Jane. Jane felt herself flush under his scrutiny. In the 4 months since she'd joined the household, the Duke had rarely interfered with Alexander's education, seemingly content with the changes she had implemented. Perhaps you would join us for our geography lesson, Your Grace. Jane suggested impulsively. Alexander would benefit from your knowledge of the estate. Something like surprise crossed the Duke's features before he composed himself. "I have correspondence to complete, but perhaps tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Alexander called after him. "Promise, Papa." The Duke hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." After he departed, Jane released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Papa never joins my lessons," Alexander said, his blue eyes wide. "Not even when Mr. Fraser was my tutor, and he was Papa's friend from university." Jane wondered if she had overstepped. "Your father is very busy managing his estates." "He's always busy since Mama went to heaven," Alexander replied, returning to his penmanship with unusual focus. The next day, true to his word, the Duke accompanied them to the garden. Alexander ran ahead, collecting stones to mark the boundaries of their map. "You've managed him well," the Duke observed as they walked side by side. "He speaks of nothing but his lessons with Miss Holloway. He's a bright child, Your Grace. He merely needed direction. And you've provided that admirably." The Duke glanced at her. "I understand from Mrs. Winters that you spend your evenings in the library." Jane felt her cheeks warm. "I hope that's not an imposition." "If you prefer I not use the library, on the contrary," he interrupted. "I'm pleased someone is making use of it. My late wife collected books but rarely read them." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his wife. "Lord Alexander told me she died of fever," Jane said softly. "Yes. Nearly 2 years ago now." The Duke's voice was controlled, revealing nothing of his emotions. Alexander called to them, breaking the moment. As Jane hurried forward to help the boy with his map, she felt the Duke's gaze following her, just as it had that day in the park. By summer, Jane had settled comfortably into her role. Alexander flourished under her care, and even the Duke had begun to shed some of his reserve, occasionally joining them for evening readings or Sunday walks in the garden. It was during one such walk that disaster struck. Alexander, spotting a robin's nest in a tree, scrambled up the branches before either Jane or the Duke could stop him. "Alexander, come down at once," the Duke commanded. "I can almost reach it, Papa," the boy called back, stretching toward a high branch. Jane saw it happen before either male, the branch bending, then snapping with a sickening crack. Alexander's scream pierced the air as he tumbled through the foliage. The Duke rushed forward, but Jane reached the boy first. Alexander lay motionless, his arm bent at an unnatural angle, a gash across his forehead bleeding freely. "Alexander!" The Duke's voice broke as he knelt beside his son. Jane pressed her handkerchief to the boy's head wound. "He's breathing, Your Grace. We must get him to the house." The Duke lifted his son with trembling hands. They rushed back to the house, servants scattering before them as the Duke carried Alexander to his bedroom. "Send for Dr. Hamilton," Jane instructed a footman as they passed. Hours passed as they waited for the doctor to set Alexander's broken arm and stitch the gash on his forehead. The Duke paced the corridor outside his son's room, his face a mask of controlled anguish. "Your Grace," Jane said softly, "perhaps you should rest." "I'll stay with Lord Alexander." "I will not leave him," the Duke replied, his voice harsh with fear. "Then let me bring you something. Tea, perhaps, or something stronger." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You're pale as a ghost, Miss Holloway. Yet you remain composed." "One of us must," Jane replied simply. Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or gratitude. "Tea would be welcome. For both of us." When Dr. Hamilton emerged from Alexander's room, his news was cautiously optimistic. "The arm will heal cleanly if he remains still. The head wound is superficial. What concerns me is the fever. We must watch him closely tonight." Jane volunteered immediately. "I'll sit with him, Your Grace." "We both will," the Duke declared. Through the night, they maintained their vigil. Alexander tossed in feverish dreams, calling sometimes for his mother, sometimes for Jane. The Duke sat rigid in his chair, only his eyes revealing his torment. Near dawn, when Alexander's fever finally broke, Jane found herself alone with the Duke, both exhausted from their night-long watch. "He called for you," the Duke said softly. "In his fever, he called for you as he calls for his mother." Jane didn't know how to respond. "Children form attachments quickly, Your Grace." "Yes." He studied her face in the dim light. "As do their fathers, it seems." Before Jane could process his words, Alexander stirred, opening his eyes. The moment passed, but something had changed between them, something neither was ready to acknowledge. By autumn, Alexander had fully recovered, though he bore a small scar on his forehead that he proudly called his battle wound. The Duke had grown less formal with Jane, often joining them for lessons or asking her opinion on books from the library. One evening, as Jane sat reading in the library after Alexander had gone to bed, the Duke entered, carrying 2 glasses of port. "I thought you might appreciate something warming," he said, offering her a glass. "The nights grow cold." Jane accepted the gesture with surprise. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Ian," he said unexpectedly. "My name is Ian. When we are alone, at least, I would prefer you used it." Jane looked up at him, startled by the intimacy of the request. "I don't think that would be proper, Your Grace. Very little about my thoughts regarding you has been proper, Miss Holloway." His honesty stunned her into silence. He sat in the chair opposite hers, the firelight casting shadows across his aristocratic features. "I find myself thinking of you at the most inopportune moments. During meetings with my solicitor. While reviewing crop yields. When I should be focusing on estate matters." Jane set her untouched port on the table beside her. "Your Grace, Ian," he corrected gently. "Ian," she conceded, the name foreign on her tongue. "I am your son's governess." "Whatever you may think you feel is not a passing fancy," he finished for her. "I've watched you these past months. Your kindness to Alexander. Your intelligence. Your quiet strength. I admired these qualities long before I realized I had developed deeper feelings. The difference in our stations matters to society, not to me." He leaned forward. "I was forced into my first marriage by family obligation. Eliza and I were cordial but never in love. When she died, I grieved for Alexander's loss more than my own. I swore I would never again marry without affection." Jane stood, needing distance between them. "You cannot mean to suggest I suggest nothing yet." He remained seated, giving her the space she needed. "I merely wish you to know that my feelings exist. That they grow stronger each day. And that I will wait, patiently, to learn if they might someday be returned." Jane turned to face him, her heart pounding. Society would never accept such a match. A duke and a governess. "Society has little influence over what happens within these walls," he replied. "And less over what happens in my heart." A knock at the library door interrupted them. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, entered with an apologetic curtsy. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but Lord Alexander is asking for Miss Holloway. He's had a nightmare about falling." Jane moved toward the door, grateful for the interruption. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at the Duke, at Ian, who watched her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Good night, Your Grace," she said formally, retreating behind Propriety's shield. His reply followed her down the corridor. "Good night, Jane." Winter brought snow to London, transforming the gardens of the Duke's townhouse into a wonderland that delighted Alexander. It also brought unwelcome visitors in the form of the Duke's sister, Lady Caroline Dunmore, and her husband. Jane first encountered Lady Caroline in the drawing-room, where she had been summoned to discuss Alexander's progress. The elegant woman surveyed Jane with calculating eyes. "So you are the governess my brother speaks of so highly," Lady Caroline said, a tone suggesting she found this puzzling. "Alexander seems quite attached to you." "I'm fond of him as well, my lady," Jane replied carefully. "Yes, well, children form attachments easily." Lady Caroline waved a dismissive hand. "I've suggested to Ian that Alexander is of an age to be sent to preparatory school. Boys need the companionship of their peers, not the coddling of women. Jane kept her expression neutral. His Grace has not mentioned such plans to me. No, he wouldn't, Lady Caroline said with a knowing smile. My brother has always been protective of those in his care. But he will see reason. Alexander must take his place in society someday, and that requires proper schooling. The Duke entered then, his expression darkening when he saw Jane and his sister together. Caroline, I wasn't aware you had requested Miss Holloway's presence. I merely wanted to meet the woman who has such influence over my nephew, Lady Caroline replied smoothly. You've kept her quite hidden away. Miss Holloway is not hidden, she is employed, the Duke countered. And her primary duty is to Alexander, not entertaining visitors. Jane recognized her dismissal. If you'll excuse me, Your Grace, my lady. Lord Alexander will be expecting his history lesson. As she left, she heard Lady Caroline's voice, deliberately pitched to Carrie. Really, Ian, you must consider your position. There are rumors. Jane hurried away before she could hear the Duke's response. That evening, a note arrived requesting Jane join the Duke in his study after Alexander was asleep. She found him standing by the window, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. You wish to see me, Your Grace? He turned, his expression softening at the sight of her. Yes, Jane. Please, sit. She took the chair opposite his desk, hands folded tightly in her lap. My sister has brought to my attention certain rumors circulating through London society, he began, his voice controlled. Apparently, my interest in my son's education has been misconstrued as interest in his governess. Jane's cheeks burned. I see. No, I don't think you do. He moved to sit behind his desk. Caroline believes she is protecting the family name. In reality, she fears I might remarry unwisely and produce an heir that would displace her son's potential inheritance should something happen to Alexander. Lord Alexander is in excellent health, Jane said quickly. Yes, thanks in no small part to your care during his recovery. The Duke ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of frustration. Caroline has invited Lady Eleanor Westfield and her daughter to dinner tomorrow. Lady Beatrice is 22, accomplished, and from an excellent family. My sister believes she would make an appropriate duchess. Jane felt as though all the air had been pressed from her lungs. I understand, Your Grace. Do you? He fixed her with those piercing blue eyes. Because I have no intention of offering for Lady Beatrice or anyone else my sister parades before me. Hope fluttered in Jane's chest, dangerous and fragile. However, he continued, to quiet the rumors and appease Caroline, I must appear to consider suitable matches. Which means for the coming weeks, we must be particularly cautious in our interactions. Of course, Your Grace. Jane rose, understanding she was being asked to keep her distance. Jane! His voice stopped her retreat. This is temporary. I need you to believe that. She met his gaze, allowing herself one moment of honesty. I do. The winter social season brought a stream of eligible young women to the Duke's doorstep, each more accomplished and well-connected than the last. Jane watched from the shadows as they fluttered their fans and laughed at the Duke's measured comments. Alexander, perceptive beyond his years, noticed the parade of visitors. Why are all these ladies coming to see Papa? He asked Jane during their arithmetic lesson. Your aunt believes it's time your father considered remarrying, Jane explained carefully. Alexander scowled. I don't want a new mama. I want you. Jane's heart constricted. I'm your governess, Alexander. That's different from a mother. You take care of me like a mama would, he insisted. And Papa smiles when you're in the room. He doesn't smile at those other ladies. Jane changed the subject quickly, but Alexander's words stayed with her. That evening, a dinner party was in progress when Jane encountered the Duke in the corridor outside the schoolroom. He looked weary, his cravat slightly askew as if he'd been tugging at it. Escaping your own dinner party, Your Grace? Jane asked, unable to resist teasing him. His smile was immediate and genuine. Caught in the act, it seems. I told them I needed to check on Alexander. He's been asleep for hours. Yes, well, they don't know that. He glanced back toward the stairs. Lady Caroline has seated me beside Lady Josephine Hartwell for the third time this week. The woman cannot discuss anything but her collection of porcelain figurines. Jane laughed despite herself. A challenging conversational partner. Excruciating. His expression grew serious. I miss our conversations, Jane. Our evenings in the library. As do I, she admitted quietly. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his sandalwood cologne. This charade cannot continue much longer. I find my patience waning. Before Jane could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. They moved apart quickly as Lady Caroline appeared. Ian, there you are. Lady Josephine was concerned by your prolonged absence. Her gaze shifted to Jane, cold and assessing. Miss Holloway. I wasn't aware Alexander required attention at this hour. Miss Holloway was just returning a book to the schoolroom, the Duke said smoothly. I happened upon her on my way back downstairs. Lady Caroline's eyes narrowed with suspicion. How fortunate. Now, brother, your guests await. After they departed, Jane leaned against the wall, her heart racing. The situation was becoming untenable. Perhaps it would be better for all if she sought a position elsewhere, before her feelings for the Duke, and his for her, caused a scandal that would harm Alexander. With that thought heavy in her mind, Jane returned to her room and began drafting a letter of resignation. The next morning, Jane's resolve was tested when she entered the breakfast room to find the Duke alone, reading the newspaper. Good morning, Jane, he said, setting the paper aside. You look troubled. I have something I need to discuss with you, Your Grace, Jane began, clutching the letter in her pocket. Before she could continue, Alexander burst into the room, waving a drawing. Miss Holloway, look what I made for you. The moment lost, Jane turned her attention to the boy. The Duke watched them, his gaze thoughtful. Later that day, as Jane supervised Alexander's piano practice, Lady Caroline entered the music room unannounced. Alexander, your Aunt Westfield has arrived with your cousin Thomas. They're waiting in the garden to play with you. Alexander looked to Jane, who nodded permission. As soon as the boy had left, Lady Caroline's pleasant expression vanished. Miss Holloway, I'll be direct. Your presence in this household has become problematic. Jane kept her composure. In what way, my lady? My brother has declined 3 highly advantageous matches this season. 3 women of impeccable breeding and substantial dowries. Lady Caroline paced the room. It has not escaped my notice, nor society's, that he prefers the company of his son's governess to that of appropriate marriage prospects. I assure you, Lady Caroline, I have done nothing to encourage any improper attention from his grace. Your very existence encourages it, Lady Caroline snapped. You're young, reasonably pretty, and apparently intelligent enough to engage his interest. But make no mistake, Miss Holloway, my brother may fancy himself in love with you, but he will never marry you. Jane flinched at the cruelty in the woman's voice. If he were to make such a catastrophic mistake, Lady Caroline continued, society would shun him. His son would suffer. The Iverson name, which has stood for excellence for centuries, would be tarnished by association with a penniless governess. I understand your concerns, my lady, Jane said, struggling to maintain her dignity. In fact, I've already drafted my resignation. Lady Caroline appeared momentarily surprised, then satisfied. Good. That shows more sense than I credited you with. I can arrange an excellent position for you in Scotland, with the Marquis of Kinloch. Their estate is quite remote, but the salary is generous. The message was clear: Jane would be sent far away, where she could pose no threat to the Iverson family's plans. That won't be necessary, a deep voice interrupted from the doorway. Both women turned to find the Duke standing there, his expression thunderous. Caroline, you forget yourself. Miss Holloway is employed by me, not you. Ian, be reasonable. You know this situation has become untenable. People are talking. Let them talk. The Duke entered the room fully, his gaze fixed on Jane. Miss Holloway, may I see this resignation letter you've drafted? With trembling hands, Jane withdrew the folded paper from her pocket and handed it to him. He opened it, read silently, then tore it in half. Your resignation is not accepted, he said firmly. Ian! Lady Caroline gasped. You cannot, I can and I will, Caroline. The Duke's voice was steel. You have interfered in my household for the last time. I suggest you join your son and Lady Westfield in the garden. Miss Holloway and I have matters to discuss. Lady Caroline opened her mouth to object, then closed it, recognizing defeat in her brother's unyielding expression. She left the room with a rustle of silk and a final glare at Jane. When they were alone, the Duke exhaled slowly. I apologize for my sister's behavior, Jane. She believes she's protecting you and Alexander, Jane replied softly. She's protecting her own interests. He moved closer. But she is right about one thing, this situation has become untenable. Jane's heart sank. I understand, Your Grace. Perhaps it would be best if you became my wife, he finished. Jane stared at him, certain she had misheard. Your Grace? Ian, he corrected, taking her hands in his. I've waited, Jane. I've played the patient suitor. I've endured my sister's matchmaking and society speculation. But I cannot, will not, watch you walk away because of others' narrow-minded prejudice. The scandal would be enormous, Jane whispered. Yes, initially. Then it will fade, as all scandals do. His thumbs traced circles on her wrists. Alexander loves you. I love you. The rest matters not at all. Jane felt tears threatening. Your sister is right. Society will shun you. Alexander may suffer for it. Alexander will suffer far more if the woman he adores leaves his life. Ian released one of her hands to touch her cheek. As will I. You truly wish to marry me? A governess with no fortune, no connections. I wish to marry you, Jane Holloway. The woman who saved my son's life twice, once from drowning, once from fever. The woman who brought laughter back to my home and light back to my heart. His voice grew hoarse with emotion. I love you, Jane. Marry me. Jane searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his blue eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Ian. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that had been restrained for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. Society will adjust, he murmured. They always do when a duke sets his mind to something. And what of Lady Caroline? Jane asked. My sister will either accept my choice or find herself unwelcome in our home. His smile was wry. Though I suspect once she realizes her opposition is futile, she'll claim credit for introducing us. A small voice came from the doorway. Are you going to be my new mamma, Miss Holloway? They turned to find Alexander watching them, his expression hopeful. Ian knelt to his son's level. Would you like that, Alexander? If Miss Holloway became your new mother? Alexander rushed forward to throw his arms around Jane. More than anything. Jane held the boy close, meeting Ian's gaze over his golden curls. In his eyes, she saw their future, a future built not on titles or societal approval, but on something far more enduring, love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. 1 year later, the Duchess of Iverson stood in the gardens of Thornfield Hall, watching her husband and stepson race paper boats in the stream. Society had indeed adjusted to her unexpected elevation, particularly after the Duke made it clear that those who snubbed his bride would find themselves unwelcome in his homes and businesses. Lady Caroline had, as predicted, eventually claimed a role in their match, telling anyone who would listen how she had recognized Jane's potential from the start. Mamma. Alexander called, using the name he had adopted immediately after the wedding. Come see. My boat is winning. Jane joined her family by the water's edge, laughing as Ian deliberately slowed his boat to let Alexander's pull ahead. That's cheating, Your Grace, she whispered when Alexander was distracted by his victory. Merely ensuring domestic harmony, Your Grace, he replied with a smile, emphasizing her title. As Alexander ran ahead to retrieve his boat, Ian pulled Jane into his arms. Happy, he asked, the question he posed every day. Beyond measure, she answered truthfully, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. Behind them, the great house of Thornfield stood sentinel, its windows gleaming in the sunlight. Inside those walls, Jane had once been a servant, moving silently through rooms she dared not claim as her own. Now, as Duchess, she had transformed those same rooms into a true home, filled with books, music, and laughter. But her greatest transformation had not been from governess to Duchess. It had been from a woman alone to one surrounded by love, the love of a boy who needed a mother's gentle guidance, and the love of a man who had seen beyond society's rigid boundaries to the woman who had captured his heart.